那说的呢，他这个你把的，这个你把的，呢，他呢，他上节送了呀，就不就送了多少票，送了多少票，搞不了呀，送给呢，他接来的，那肯定是有的，送的你把肯定是用过来是用的，他一边主要是用的，他先前他们是这样的，我这是长毛的，叔叔们都把肯定是用呐。他因周围热巴共为送上的，所说文多把的热巴抗战学呢，的大大是共同呀。这抗战是共同的是的，上届个呢就，现在所说看到没把抗战学呢，点了点白，他去忙不去送去那顶这个，那他上届个不个呢送了多把的比我的是。
And the second line in this verse pays homage to the quality, to the holy speech of the Buddha, in relation to the power and basically the capacity that the speech of the Buddha has, and how it affects sentient beings. So the power of the speech of the Buddha is in relation to the numberless sentient beings, is able to respond to all of their wishes, to all of their needs, because the Buddha has this capacity of being aware of the mental dispositions, different characteristics of sentient beings. Therefore, this speech of the Buddha is able to respond in this skillful way to the needs of sentient beings. So it is to this speech that Lama Tsongkhapa pays homage.
那的呢，是讲什么的嘞？什么的？他上届上届千八岁的抗战学的是上届可能他觉得送，推了要确保去的切。他带来确保确实呢，多把别的抗战学过来用的，他上届推给接力线呢，他让新的抗战学过来用的，现在马里把全新式把些，他现在那张他一把些，全他一把些要变难的。就是我年龄极大化性的，抗战学呢，可能几，年龄差了些个呢，这样呢，年龄他几十把的加起吧，经济个，那么这个现在没，大家讲的切当学的，加起吧，当，这个十把的加起吧，你讲的切个，他刚才说的那长嘛，可年龄看的抗战学呢，的极大化性的是同个，经济个钱把是用啊个些，我经济讲的。
And the third line in this verse is a paying homage to the mind of the Buddha and the quality of the mind of the Buddha in reference to the nature of this mind, of this Buddha mind. The mind of the Buddha has the capacity to perceive all phenomena just as they are. So the perception that the Buddha has of all phenomena is the true mode of existence of all phenomena. So we're going from this very subtle dimension, and is also very vast because this is including all phenomena. So there's this kind of depth in the sense of the profundity or the subtlety of the perception, and also in this extensive dimension in relation to how it covers all phenomena. And he perceives, or the Buddha perceives, phenomena just as it is. And it is to this quality that Lama Tsongkhapa is paying homage.
他他妈的了呀，点着的他下季做些话的下届些的他，家个来接到日忙不是这个多的那个他，他那东巴些的下季日个些，下季日个那个日个做起，他的那个呀，他去，他去被搞出来，他去退休出些可能，刚才他的那个被，做着。现在他多些，他那就听这些去送过来。刚才听这个做的了，他刚才讲了呀，有点听这个搁到送的，这个有点生活安这个，小几这个做，小几这个他家包些呢，听这个的了呀，唱这个音色，他的了古巴这个音色，同到出，但的最近的这当把结果去那他忙不起有了，他们就嘟时间呢，同到的那些人。
Yes. And the final line of this verse refers to the king of the Shakya clan. So the Shakya is referring to this clan or this community of people. And so within this community of within the Shakya community, you can think the mightiest or this kind of king, this being who is the king of the Shakya clan, has the qualities of the body, speech, and mind, which have been described in the previous lines. To this being, I pay homage.
So, ta gang le ta ki song sha de, ta chi song le to ba bi ka le, ta yi bin zhui re wa kong ko re xiong de, 다치 좋아 세나다 센천 타이바 도don데 공화에 딘디가 다치 상제가 송가라 송요리정데 다치 주지 봉보 제트시 동세 남지 용자 송돼야 돼. 다 주지 봉보의 제트시 동세데 증가기 전에는 하장 망보지 송거야 돼. તે ઘરે zonde ta nga su chi ro senjen ge chi nyomo ba le ya rig man da ya che chi tong chi wa ti je je ge nyembo ta chu ji bong bo ti je je ge ta nyembo lam na ti nyomo ba re re ni chi khandre chi ne pang go re te khandre chi ne te chi ane ta chi me ba so go re se on de ti ge tham do sul de ya ane ya che chi tong chi song yo wa te ane ta chi kar zo ra ta 아니 타입인 주위 도ton 강에 치티야 딘리 송샤 오래세 되래.
And so now, moving on with this idea of all of these sentient beings which have these sort of, numerous wishes, and reflecting on the power of the speech of the Buddha, we can think of all the teachings that the Buddha gave, and it's commonly known that the Buddha gave these 84,000 teachings, which is a huge amount of teachings. And the reason for this is often explained as, all of these, the variety of sentient beings, and it's an antidote. Each one of these 84,000 teachings respond to each one of the disturbing emotions that in the mind of sentient beings, and they present methods as how to abandon them, also how to put these methods into practice. And so basically the speech in this sense and these teachings of the Buddha are a way in order to fulfill the extensive and the vast wishes of all sentient beings.
Also da 딘리 제단 안에 다 타입이 센젤은 도바데 다치 탄 도바데양 타입아 연구요래 단 도바데 강야라 가려요래. 아니 딘리 송이 거래 단 도바데 직출 도드나 넘버니 나래 단데 준지나데 워들에 송샤데 다 도바 가려요래 송데 다 센제 탐젤이야 등을 돈도 그 삼로디 요래스 등을 돈도 세미요장 세쇼 등을 매버서 삼로디 요래스 요에들에 있나요 다치 등을 그네 가르주 다치 gyöte rangshime patruk deyashi. Ngone na dingwa toyaga ndoba yona dingwa ku gyöte meba soko horite na dingwa tondo sewe jang dingwa gyola ngombar jik siyonte dingwa ku jik chanchang ane chik trup dego yore se. Tan doba te tangbo kare siyonte dingwa tondo ku ndoba chik yore se te chik.
And if we think of the wishes of sentient beings, and if we're stating that the wishes of sentient beings are numberless in a sense, and that the function of the teachings is to fulfill the wishes of sentient beings, is to think about how are our wishes and how are our fundamental wishes actually fulfilled. So the first step in this reflection involves understanding what this wish is, and this brings me to contemplate this verse of the Bodhisattva Chavatara by Shantideva. And this first couple lines of this verse here is saying that although there is this wish to abandon suffering, one sort of runs towards, completely runs towards this suffering, or towards suffering itself. And so this is really showing that although there's this fundamental aspiration to have this, to be free from suffering, one is not actually, one is continuously accumulating the causes for this experience of suffering and not actually able to abandon them in that sense.
So, 다 대네 다 등을 도바 등을 돈도 그 세미요나야 등을 그 규트 접촉 그래서 다 치코란 게 도바 나신 게니 다 찍마서 지 레가시 마서네 자와 다다시니 접촉 매바데 티직 동게요서 다네 다 디니마 아니 타마들이야 다 간대요래서 도바치 가려서네 다 디도초 대완도 장스 대화대배 아니 참마근도 그래 찍결해서 단도드나 대화 등을만도 받아 대완도 받아 참마 찍결해데 이나양 다 뚜묵비에서 형데 다 뚜묵게 소소가 대화 참마테다 직 아니 맞죠 다치 자신의 다 갑대데 매 아니 지금 해봐서고 하나 신게 배된다고 전에 뚜묵게 맞죠 아니 대화 참마테 아니 배좀 주고 요래 매봐서 샤고 요래서 어떤지 대완도자 뚜묵게 배랑게 좀 세야 어때래.
So although there's this aspiration to be free from suffering. We're constantly sort of accumulating its causes of suffering. So it's showing really, although we have this wish, we are sort of unskilled basically in accomplishing that. And there's a true weakness in our ability to be able to carry out and to actually make that wish happen. And this leads us to the second part of the verse, which is, although that we wish for happiness, because of ignorance, we destroy happiness as if it was our enemy. And so this idea of we all have this common aspiration of being happy, and this is, a common, you could think of a common humanity or common across all sentient beings, this aspiration to be happy, but yet we consider sort of, we approach happiness as if it was our enemy, and this is really because of the power of ignorance. Because of ignorance is functioning of experiences of happiness.
Also, ta dende na ta chi ane ta nga so de chi chama de mewa so shang ke de thamale ya tumuli tik tok do se ya chi ta demu de ane chi ta chi ta nga so de chi chama njo je ka chawan de tik de yo chi dinde de she ke ka ta wona demu se ya de ta den di ka demu se ya de kar re de chi tangbo nga so ta chi den won zung go do se ta ti ka cha de ta le yang go yo re.
And so if we're thinking that ignorance is the destroyer of all of our happiness, it's the root of the destructions of all of our happiness, then it seems like a very important point to be able to identify truly what this ignorance actually is.
Also, ta dinde ne ta chi tumuk se ate ane ngonzen chebe ndo bi kable na ta ane dinde ta chi ne ane tumta so ti gang la ta tang man ja tumuk se ate khande si ngonzen ke yo mi se ate tumul la ta tang ge ane rig man ja mong bo shi ngo res tumuk gang la ya ta tang ge chane de on de ta tiring wa sun dine ma chi so ane tumuk se ate ane thang tha tik so na ane chi marik ba la tik yo marik ba se ate tik yo wa Tindi kola yang Geshe jang de da te chik marik pa se de ngon se che tang khande yung gun do pati kola da tiri nga su dine ma kan tu to shi an Geshe tini shi yin se.
And ignorance is recognized and identified in slightly different ways across the different tenets, across the different philosophical Buddhist schools. They all have a sort of different perspective and a different understanding as to what it means and what it refers to. And so here in this class today, we're going to be exploring this idea of ignorance, and it's also this idea, another word for it would be not knowing, and what this not knowing actually refers to. This is something that we will be exploring today in the class.
Yeah. Da jedang ne da chi ane nambi ta chap kan ne chu de wo shi lab sha ta marik pa se shi ta marik pa se ti jedang khande chi la go yo se ti ta marik pa se kwa de ta di do cho de chik de nam jing ma su rik pa se ta shi ban thong wa se shi ngro wa shi rik sung thong sung shi sung se ti chik de le ya ta chi ga sik shi jam ne do cho de marik pa se on de ta tonda de le ya chik de le ane 도청도 아니 마시바 만통아 양나지 마살바시한테 어딘지 찍들래네 다 마릭바시하게 아니 민데 딘지 다상 줘래 타이나 미 타온데 다데 간지 타고레세나 페나 아니 치 마릭바시하데요 다 강랭아 주니 치 가정고 니셔데 센종고 난게야 센종고 그리고 만보시가 있는 게 아니 뇨모그초 그는게야 뇨모게 치 내가 자완도 주기 요비나냐 Zenyu chicken again, Marik Bas, Saint John Chilang was in Chagorti, Ming de Marik Bas immediate Tawa Council, Tasa Ishade, Saint John Chilang was in Kuveras.
And so this word, ignorance, or if we stay closer to the Tibetan in a more literal translation, not knowing, an easier way or a way to help us understand what this not knowing means is we can think about the opposite, or what ignorance actually refers to. We can think of its opposite. So when we are not ignorant, or when we are not ignorant, this is referring to the fact that we know something, that we've seen something, that we've perceived something, that we saw, that we felt, and so forth. So these are experiences through contemplating what actually knowing means. This is going to help us understand what the opposite is, not knowing, which is referring to ignorance. And so understanding in this way, reframing it in this way, helps us understand that ignorance is referring to this idea of not knowing, of unawareness, of a lack of clarity. Also within this frame, within these classes where we're exploring the mental factors, we've been going through all these different mental factors, and we're entering this category of the disturbing emotions, the mental afflictions, and these are divided into 6 root afflictions, which are all mental factors. And within these 6 root afflictions, ignorance is one of them.
So ta dana di kable ya chik yang te chik kharko gu de sena ta nambi tatab sena ta nambi semka rik bi kan de shit ani shwe kable na ta na nga chu ge chi ta dan jo mi se jo ma chama hen ji ge ji ta so so le ya chik yang ani ranjing ge shibi cha yong ko re ani ranjing ge ta chik kare na ma shi ya man thong ya ani chik sat de jang go ya rik ma bo shi yong go yo re ta de chama kar re song ne 아니 남베 직다럽 간이 되시 장원데 아니 맞을래야 지 시바단 통화세 대양 아니 지 셈랑 간이 납사 되시 장원데 다 셈다 센종 간이 납사 아니 되시 제 갑리나 소소래야 된디 시바 아니 통화게 양 질리 용케게 센종 그렇게 직자 대여비 같은 세는데 대여비 gen생게 맞선 통으로 시레세 직 되시 제거 다이나 맞서 만 통화에다 마리바 아니 지금 또 마토야 아니 지금 세보 맞춰야 지금 아주 ran신 거 뭐 보신 거래 양고양도 양나야 아니 지금 뭐 보시 마토야 다들 가르쳐야세요 돼. 대 가르쳐야지 근데 아주 그 jel레나 진디기 심이 찡게 맞죠라 강고 찡게 로시기 그래서 또 돈도 되시되시고요래 단도 강고 찡게 아니 로 진디 강고 찡게 생종 그렇게 찡거래 뒤 맞을래야 아니 아니 가르쳤다 세번 통 마토야 아니 지 소소가 삼반 나신지 밖에 다다 용 마토야 돼 딘디게 생종으로 기요래 센데 시티시고요네
Gena ngi daga te pechiteri nya poshita yomare chetsang kiran kike tes chedoa kiran di yangertes kare yangertende sunroche shebate tama tonwati ki gymsente kiran kare sonson
ale ta 아니 시바다 만통하세야 돼. 가서양 즉 가르치는 만통래서 지와실이라 가르치는 만통래서 가서 이길래야 진디기 시야던 통야라 강고 쟁게 글로시 걸다 강고 쟁게 디 코가 니바데 가서 가르치는 공배 슈신도 아니 다치 소소리에 깨와다 체름 몸볼 때야 곰시당 때야 아니 가서 다치 다 진디기 그렇게 앞에는 지금 가서 칼라를 지는 마서네 칼라 때는 코베니 배도 충분차 어디 여비 같은 게 당 아주 그다 지 심하지 통마지 코소 가는 거 지가 여러세 딘디기야 생중 그렇게 여러세 다디 뭐 딘디지 가는 데 시죠 그래서
Lasso tuchina. So if we think about ignorance in the context of Buddhism and Buddhist psychology, the general idea is that we can think of humans or we can just think of sentient beings in general, but we have, because of this quality of being sentient, of having a mind, there is this nature to be able to perceive phenomena. And so there's capacity of knowing, but there is also this obstruction which is present in our mind which creates a situation of not knowing. And there's often a need for us to find clarification in various situations because we're not able to perceive things adequately or correctly. And so the reason why we have this impediment, in a sense, or this obstruction to seeing things or to perceiving things correctly is because there's this big blockage in our mind. And there's this mental factor, which is kind of intervening, which is preventing us from seeing the situation correctly. And this blockage is something which we've been cultivating. It's something which we've been nourishing. It's something which we've been feeding for a very long time. Just like if you give food or somebody eats food, we develop strength and that person becomes strong. It's a similar thing with this mental factor of ignorance. It's been sort of nourished and cultivated over time, which means that we have this obstruction to be able to perceive things correctly or as they are in front of us.
아니 담 마리바센나 마시 베센 미시바센 삼삼 미시바 딘디 송거래 딘디 아니 직다 시바르센나 센중 그리고 대소 참마양 아주 다직 직쟁거 펑보 다 제메게 제메바 딘디 사이네 마레스 대소래양 이버드 텐데와 제절에 연대와 식충부지 차대요. 그쪽 아니 양 식진도 망보식 요대야 식마서 다 카운터도 되나 맞죠 삼로 맞죠 지금 로다 릭바지야 되려요. 맞죠 직풍그 아니 제와세는 뒤 식진 식충부지 요바데 다 지금 다른 거는 양 아딘 거는 지고르스.
And so when we're thinking about ignorance, or when we're thinking about this not knowing, it's important to consider this mental factor within the wider sort of context of the aggregates, the 5 aggregates. They are very heavily connected with these other aggregates, and not only connected, but they heavily influence them. So it's important to understand this, and this is a presentation which is asserted throughout all of the Buddhist schools.
So that indeed that 다 강타 가서 얘기라 힌지 지지야샤야 딘디 마릭 바센다 맞절에 다치 이거 니리 좀 주신 통해라 강고 챙게 세대 요나테 컨디시오레스 온데 디마 ngoon듯이 그런 게 다치 안데신데 주시베 갑레나 다 랑게 열라 몽바스 온데 그게 맞절에 다다신 통메 챙게 그 레간로 마선에 찌오데레 다그 첼레바데 그런 게 첼링원이데 다 땡원지 제고고요래 뭐 딘디가 생종 그러시리야 다 mean that ko marik bazin and mishi bazin mean tangjojirama chile so the carresiate that the gonglishiva nashi korang chile gita and lekati tin chadures.
And so as we're describing this kind of obstructing function, or this obstructing manifestation that ignorance causes in our mind, it prevents us to see an object or to perceive an object clearly. Now let's start to think about what its nature is. What is it actually like? What does ignorance do? So it prevents us from seeing something. So ignorance can be understood as a mental factor that is the confusion of consisting in the absence of knowing, or as a cognition that apprehends in a distorted manner. So this is the way that ignorance can be understood.
So ane tati ane chik ngonzi mekole papa tomek ane shung kantizia tinolea maripa kansenazia ta maripa sia de kandishiyore sonde kansambi shipas ta dindiga ane mishipa shikres mishipa tiki karche gres yonde 맞절이야 다 노바 가르치 그래서인데 아니 다 추는나 로버링이 봐서인데 그게 내리 다다시 많이 봐 자치 아니 랑가지 마서나 랑가 로발을 친주야 야 아니 대주 뭐보지 깨치야 대나신 다 디니마 아니 다 녀모 샴바스 깨베니 단 건시 그랬다시 딘디게 땡쟁게 리첸스용이 감들 리첸스한테 그 제레 그런 게 레간도 되려서 딘디시 원진 제샤요래 그런 게 제레 감니.
And so if we continue to reflect on how it manifests, or what it does, in a sense, its function, in Asanga's Abhidharma, he says that ignorance is not knowing the three realms, it's also in relation to having a distorted or a mistaken understanding of the Dharma, having uncertainty. And it is functioning as creating the basis for all other disturbing emotions to arise.
다 딘디 원지 체 갑레나 다 데레야 딘니 치 넘베 따뜻 그나레나 데티스 강 원지 체 갑레나 데지양 만다와시 다치 따뜻 소소 다 마리 바세야 데 원지 첸토이 갑레나 영테스 코 만다와신 거를 단디니 마티치 아니 테스 주나 텐소와 데 가레송데 다 마리 방원진 셀이야 아니 단다 아니 센종 미시 몽바 쯤레생 게 미시 버긴 가서 다시 가레나 여르도 만통아 쯤 다가랑테 통메토아 쯤데 다가랑 딘디 아니 콜레야 미시 여르저 강아멘조 코랑레 여르세야데 미시 강아멘조 코랑게 가서레 통마치가 코랑게 제레 때 쯤레세 딘디게 시식겨레 센종 몽비 미시베 몽바 쯤세 다 니바디 인테 셰카레 자그레송디 아니 몽바 쯤게 생각말에 코랑게 춘출로 등중고 그래서 코랑게 제레데 아니 이르록바진 증케시 딘디게다 엔데셰 잡다니 총 단데셰 잡다니데 당보데 컨데레선데 단다 아니 단다 파파 토메당 토메 근처에서도 로보이니 고조가 조 가르스나 아니 전다 마릭바세한테 조가 소리야 직 토마진게 코랑 딘디기 시바지레 마도 코랑게 이르록반 증고 말해스 ko yobi jinsen ta di chis senjong shamba suli yu loba le tinjo gore ma to korong jinsen ko ma res de shi chi jure ta di ane shamba de pa de chu ji ta bala so ba tendi ane ta ke ba mo ba ji ge korong ge yur chu chu lo de nge par den sen ko res korong ge ma zen de tik ma res ta de yang jinsen su su le tang yor kan de tendi ji kan ni ko ngun zi che tang kan le yang ane des man tam ba zin na ta tang de shi jap tang ma ra shin ko res.
And now I would just like to take a little bit of time to explore ignorance in the context of different philosophical schools and the different tenet systems. And so the first one here is identified. So the first way that ignorance can be identified or understood is considering ignorance as simply a mental factor of a not knowing, or this obscuring or this darkness of not knowing. So this would be the first way to understand ignorance. And this is something which is asserted by Asanga and Vasubandhu. And it's this idea, it's just this notion of not knowing. Yeah, there's not an idea that the object is being held in a mistaken way. There is not a mistaken apprehension. It's just not knowing. And the second way that ignorance, it can also be interpreted and understood, which is interpreted by many other scholars, such as Dharmakirti and so forth, is that not only is it a mental factor which is obscured, which doesn't see or does not know, but on top of that, it is apprehending the object in a mistaken manner. So this is a second dimension, which is presented by the other tenet systems.
Penata chi papa tome la soba tindi songwa country se terita ta pe pen tindi chi kani ane pena ane chi jena pena ngaso ane pena ane chi ta chitoro wa tindi ane chi ane karso ta chi nima de pa ane yumtro ikavlias pe ane 사실 참만 나본도 어딘지 실라 마셀은 통이 갑들이야 아니 가서 지금 탁반도 어딘지 아니 지 고고도 어딘지 지게 야서 단지 통이 갑래나 아니 텔레야다 소소 아니 텔레 준도 삼삼 거네 아니 신나지야 아니 로번 좀 봐주 좀 근데 연구를 대 영화대 담보 가르치는 담보 아니 지 문반도 지 강양 통마치 세보만 통해지 연구래스 대 가르스나 대 마릭 바세 드레스 무슨 뜻이지 다대 덴디 아니 마릭 바세나라 아니 지 문반도 지 요바 때라 때니 디치를 가르친 거래 모델라 준도 삼삼 거니 다지 좀바지게 디니 신나라 소바 디니 신이 디니 마창베다 딩나진라 당가진나 참마 디니 연구래 세운데 담보 문반도 지 고래스 te ne tanda ne marikpa deres ti chi siya ta chi she nang da te dundu samin zamba la so ba te ni shi ne danzin so chi le chung gore se ka che tir
Hinengen la tela yul tela kare yul chingi lokpa tende zenga mareve
yul la to chinju lo ban zeng go ma res pe na tang bong a su chi ane ta ke pe di gang le na 당보 아니 문반도 낙보지 내용데 낙보데 요바 짐세나 때니 신이 가서 보기 아니 다 준도 삼바게 좀바실레도 당보 아니 그냥 통마 진기 마릭 바세야데 티 유르칸 중공마 텔레 유르세야데 같이 시고 말해
라소 하고스 라소 Okay, and so to continue with this first presentation of ignorance, which is ignorance, a mental factor, which is simply not knowing, it's an obscured mental factor. So there's this example which is presented, which you might be familiar with, which is mentioned by Asanga and so forth, with this at the moment of either dawn or dusk, when the light is not very clear, and there is this slight sort of unclear sort of dark sort of light coming through, and one is not able to actually see a room very clearly, and to believe that there is to see a rope, and to perceive, although it's a rope, one perceives it as a snake. So because of this obscuration, because of this lack of clarity in the light, one is not able to see correctly. And so this first step of obscuration, of darkness, of not seeing properly, is what ignorance is. And this ignorance means that it's going to then sort of, because of this lack of knowing, see a snake, which will then instigate a fear in the mind, and which will then bring about all types of suffering and problems within that person's experience. So here it's very important that we don't consider, in this sense here, ignorance as grasping at the object in a mistaken way, because it's simply the fact of not knowing. There's this first sort of basis of not knowing, which is then bringing on these this fear and so forth.
Marik Basia Chung, Marik Bayobatela Tene, Ane, the Susula Pejana and the Wadilia, Ane was Pombola Soba, Susu Ranching, one the Karim and Toma, Chia de Maribat and Toma to a check. Ta Maribati Yobatela Tene, nearly Chishindas, Ane Sebo Montoyonde, Dela Tene, Chinchulo and Jim Corez, that dancing said Shine, and the Maribag Chisia, and a dancing. Pombola so daten zambasi, Tindi soso daten zambasi, Tindi tra mambo chung, Trawa detale Tini ma shini nyomo shamba tsama Tini ma chungurese. Mata kozo pongrab de shit in the Sungore, a better chicken churza mambo shitinde, ne Saint-Jure, and the consancho sonjus on mambo ne, tanda ne Mari Batan dancing save, Katina tachi Mandawa doji. Ane Marik Bada dancing singly, Susus Mambosh Sungu, Til Sonia de Su and Dig, and Dig, that of Shachine, and Sungure, and the Tatu Shamba de Indoina, and Marik Bada dancing Nikate, Dawashacho Yore, one day on the Tandan de Susodo chair, Dig Cartanian, as well qua there, Dawashi Tigore, what in the Chanere.
Yes. And so, in what I've just explained, it's important to understand that ignorance is really this first step. Not knowing is really this first step. And if we think about it with another example in relation to our aggregates, it's because that we are not knowing, we do not know, we are unaware of the nature of our aggregates, we're unable to see them, that this leads to a grasping of the self, which leads to a grasping or clinging at the self. But this is sort of a second stage. The first stage is really not knowing how they truly exist, and the second one, and this not knowing, is leading to this grasping, to this mistaken view of the I. And because there's this there's this grasping at the I, and this mistaken understanding of what this I is, all of the other sort of disturbing emotions kicking after that. And His Holiness, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, he often gives teachings, and the teachings that he gives are in relation and based upon this view, where ignorance and the grasping of the self are understood or are differentiated. In other tenet systems, ignorance and grasping of the self will be sort of understood as synonyms. So there is a particular sort of a message and a particular lesson here to gain from being able to separate these two, the ignorance and the grasping.
So, ane that niba taki gong shiva na shen ane lopo chuda la saba ge tati chik ane chik marik pa se ate ta harangi ane kazuro tanda ane yu chinchu lo de koranga rangi nzingo gres ta kozo nzingo lab go e jinse tsuwa chi karse na marik pa se ate rikpa se ate ki gong tangbo se na shi rikpa docho tata de marik pa ingo gres rikpa se ate kar se onde nili ki to yang da pa chatta wa shi ni ringe ta shirap pena ta chi tomba ni to bi shirap wa tindi shi le rikpa la go res marik pa le ni ti kapte tata shi yo go res rikpa docho tata nzinge shi go gre ma to te ma chena ani marik pa zi ta se te mayin ba tsamda te le shamba tsamna marik pa zi me ta na yung ko ma re se wa ta ti gimse tsu chi te jang yo ta ti su te chitang ni ta jab ko kang ni te yang na ba sol te chak po ro da yang chi chena ta tu yang chi chena gu ba men jo de je thong se gre te na yang ani so khar zo ta da yang chi yang ke pa ko so so ge dim san da tin de marik pa ngon jan ta tang zo dan din ji yo sam sam ro so so yang te yi shin de chong na ma ba le yang rembe lo jong chi ka le yang o tang ni di kang le ta chi ko wa de chi ma so na ma do chi Leon to some young days. Oh, that's pendomism that the should go ahead and send it in the hero.
And so now if we look at the second sort of presentation of ignorance, so in another tenet system, so here if we principally think of Dharmakirti, so he asserts that ignorance is not only not knowing, but there is this mistaken grasping of the object, which is also occurring with this mental factor of ignorance, yeah? Because what he is asserting and what other of the same sort of tenets assert is that if we think of what knowing is this idea of perception, and it's perceiving as it is. So the opposite of not knowing, or the opposite of ignorance, is knowing things as they are. And so in this sense, we can think of, for example, wisdom which realizes emptiness. Yeah. So it's through the opposite that it's indicating that for Dharmakirti, that it's not simply a matter of not knowing, there is a matter of perceiving the object in a mistaken manner, which must be added on. So here, maybe this seems a little bit tedious to sort of be creating little differences between the different tenet systems and how they identify it, but I think it is a little bit tough sometimes and a bit boring to go through these points, but I thought that it might be useful sort of to mention it, because it might also spark a little bit of interest, and also if you're able, a little bit of interest in yourself, and then it hopefully, encourage you to go out and study and to see what these different views and presentations have actually, they will bring you a lot, they will help you a lot in that sense, if you're able to do your own little exploration based upon hearing these ideas.
Last Tindindo, that they chick Tatamanta, and the Mariba Chikakanina, Susan Tesha Japtan, and the Manta and Chick Tets, and the Tasusu, and the Quatochona, or Tindigani, and Chick Sosole, the Karawi Tachik Kanindo, which is Sosolean, Nimari Mase, Tachik Karzura, Soetolean, Chick Tisoga, Pentose, Guananda, and Tindi country in Wayan, Susoga, that is Susoga, Karesu Lola Pawayana. One day, Chindish Japton Yashido, and they are pushing to us some good in the Karachona. That is also within the Diashirin to young touch it in there is here. Quayon Tatu Gondroton, Tatu Korangan, Patsinichi, the Chin and the Tikundesia, no Jemo, but Anga Tindiga, Golo John Chetan, Tamnam Jire, and now the Matola Tindita Martina, Tamboyanchi, so with Chosambajin, Tatu, Johnny Sumni Tatona, young days could call and Sibon John Pendo, you serious.
And I think also to be able to develop an understanding of these different explanations, it will. The point is that it helps us in our daily life, and the point is that it's able to aid us in our daily life. And if we can hear these different sort of explanations, if something resonates with us, we're able to take it and sort of apply it in our daily life, and that's really the best thing to do. It's not like 100% this is right or this is wrong. It's really a matter of seeing for yourself what actually resonates, what you see would make the most sense, which would be the most helpful for you, to take that on and to aid you in your daily life. And really the tenet systems, there's a lot of debate which goes on amongst these different schools, and it's important to bear in mind that we're not just interested here in debating and this is right and that's not right. In one way, this is helpful to develop a sort of it helps you in one process of learning, and there's sort of benefits in that. But here, I don't think this is really necessary or useful. I think the point is to really be able to look at one topic from different angles, and to be able to, in that sense, broaden one's perspective and one's understanding of a single topic by reflecting on it through different lenses.
So the Delia, so country on the Tatendevi, touching Marik Bazin, and machine Kigulote, Te about Tela Tene, Tangazolean, Chick, Ane Tig, Paki Yurtin, Yurlia, Ane Yurtu Chick, Yella Tavi Kabla, Teo Vigenzenga, Yella Tavi Kabla, Ane Chu, Tanangazo dances yet, so bed, Zawachim Bishushi. Ishan second like to make a social chimarawashi, your bunch, not so that ranchish, Katina, Ranjing lady at Chigi Tanguni, Toloj in Sablatana, yes, Adama to some chipari doas yaji. Chichibondo, Machu, alone the Shenada, share your tina. Tanguni, which again, Susu in Yamari with Suinolea, Tangazuleka chicken dronde. Tan chick, Tanshur, the Soso, the South Chishu timba, to Ranjing and Zing. Then Zentang de Kandan Zenger on the chick look quickly and that's Rawa was second to me chicken bandage, Tindi Tatan Shile. Tindi Shile Savi Jilly and that Tindavi Rawa to make a chick. Then Zenia de Zawa Chimbushi with Chani, that is Son Juche Chet. Tene touching Mambo Shuji Chani, that can get some, Tinema Numa Sama, Tinin Gonzikere, that Sama, Savi Jisha, Mariban Wonsen Guad, and Enganji. Sama didn't do that big Jungan and Jungan Tartic. That come about so going to do that. Tambo, I may pass there and once on a chet and Mariba she guad and Enganji there is.
And so this ignorance, this not knowing, it brings about this misperception in a sense of the object. And we notice this in ourselves, that we consider ourselves, this I, as being so precious, as being the most important thing in the world, you know, and we have this sense of this I being independent. And it's kind of this sense of this I being so important and independent is very natural in a sense, is naturally present within us. And even though we could say, oh, yes, you know, for the benefit of all sentient beings, and have this aspiration that everybody wants to be happy and that we're all equal in that sense, if we really look at how we behave, we can notice that our I, the me I, is so important, you know. It's we consider it as really the grandest of all in that sense. And if we go down, and we really look deep down within us, we have this sense that this I, which is so important, is independent, has this kind of this autonomous kind of nature in the sense. And this is what we're really heavily clinging and grasping onto. And this I, which we think is so important, we do a lot. Because of this initial grasping, we do a lot to be able to protect it. Anything which might threaten it, we're always trying to protect it in that sense. And this is where all the problems kind of come about. And so this is why all of the tenet systems agree that ignorance is fundamentally problematic, because it brings about only all of these faults and all of these difficulties within our lives. And so they all agree upon this, and therefore they all agree on the necessity to undo it, to eliminate this ignorance.
Yeah. So Chona, so that's Kanis Tatang, Kanichi Congress, Tashina, Pena Tachi, Suso, Tatang, the condition to some Suso, Tatang, Kanichibas Chetona, and Namji Suso condition was a check to say Shingora. Tajadan was a Chimbu, Zungo Yare, Soso Chimbu. And the Mares yet in this one is your Martina, Chumbu Zentante. The Shambala Turna, conditions to see a Shingora, Shambala Tatan did a Sosola Tatan Nide, and a chick Chapper condition to say. But Chapper Chumbu shoes into the Yana Chapper tears Shida Manjusha. So good, the Sosolian Zentante, Sosolia Tatan Segura. So Otelia, Maso, Chinimarelia, Chapachetona, so that the chick Tinder was a tig, Lotte, Yawachirendo, Tachi Castle, Tachi Penton Gashirendo, Yanate, Tachi Lotte, Chick Counter, Tachulo, Carchinchelos, and Andalo, the Yard Shirendo, Medusia, Shingoro, that counter, Kazan, and the Temaching and the Zentachina Chushi, interesting. Tende Kavlia, Sanje Carson Shayarzana, Danye Daki, and Gwensenanta, Danye Daki Trasenanta, that's Susoran Reyes. They on the tea Tadala Carchi Songers, and the Letang Embachebala, Danye Daki, Pombo in Sesh. That's Suso Lega de Jasinanta, Leka Yaposina, Carche, Mayo Siete, Pombo de Rani Ranres, Susoran Reyes, Suso Pombo Matushan, but Sigunga Pombo Chito Mares. What the name is Johnny Tangasu, and a Pombo Rechini, Tana, Shine that chick must over. Do Pentoage Tagu, Candice Tag to say, what in the Ganion, that's Susoya, Nimari in chick Suso, Chego and all the pa Yarna, not as a Masolia, and the Kotambo, Rabaji Gani Masutatan, Missy Tatan, Missy and Rotan, it has Pentoyon cigarettes.
And so when we're dealing with eliminating ignorance, this involves shifting our mind. And so what does this mean, shifting our mind? We're thinking about this I, which we this I which we're grasping at, but mainly on how the function here is not about just thinking that we consider ourselves as very, very important. You know, I think I'm very important, and it's not just a matter of recognizing this attitude that we have, but it's more about how we do this process of grasping which is occurring, because this shifting your mind doesn't mean that you have zero value or that, you know, you're worthless in a sense. What we're interested here in dealing with eliminating ignorance is eliminating and changing the way that you're grasping at the I, and think about, in a comparative manner, how do you consider yourself and how do you consider others in a sense. So do I consider myself as equally valuable, as equally precious as somebody else in a sense? Is there a big difference? Is there a little difference? And this is a process really of analysis which I encourage you to do on a daily basis, to think about, you know, of your mental attitude, and to really question it at that point. Is this actually helpful? You know, is the way I'm looking at this, is the way I am believing in the situation or perceiving the situation actually helpful? Is this a mistaken view? Am I completely off beam? And this reminds me of a quote that I mentioned previously in the class, when the Buddha stated that, you know, you are your own protector, you are your own enemy. And whether you engage in a virtuous action or a negative action, you are your own witness. And so I think this verse really sort of sums it up in that sense, that we need to go through this process of analysis in watching our perception, and be our own witness in identifying what is actually useful or what is actually not useful. And in the sense, this process of checking is like we're looking in the mirror in actually what we're doing. And I think if we're able to engage in this process of analysis, we will be able to get some kind of benefit on a very sort of practical level in our daily life. When we do this process, there's a question here. When we do this process of analysis on ignorance, is that means we notice our conduct and how we relate to others? Gena susu tigi tarchuchi yondurwa. Susu ran la tarchuchi yondu. Tarchuchi tante kande da wuchi chegugure sana. Lobchuti kurangi samsul karesana susu ran ki chopa. Kande chigi min yangnus mishen dan yamdo dewa kande chigi yome tende jepe kande ina.
Tade jawade siboranda choma son tirwa ta chesena ane ne gangle chute kande resena soso ge namje sablo tancho te moni ge pete ka chik ane chusen nangse se jingora pe jamo tranjang ji chagdu chagmu se jingora soso la jibachana ta shamba dunle da ngaso ge ta soso pe yangdo da pe chik soso pe chene chi junse ya de zawanin meya ge de ngaso de ta chi chigara ta mi ngela ba ta ina soso ta chigbo ge soso ta ni shagna yobi kable ya ta ngoni ki samlo jina da nga khandi jire sha se jungro ane chi samsamna khande pento yungore jina ane soso le ane nipa ni chi pha to ni mi chamba ji ge soso la tsata ge na se ni jungro ta soso le ya ta tang de dini do gang chen na yang des pento do ngone dini do chen ni ta ngoni ngi di soso ge ta chi le ka cheba ka gi sheba le ka gi ta chi cheba 대당 소소 삼로 따다 로드 도움 두세 중거로 다대치 추 가자 임비 가자 말에 추 안에 추켈레면다 추당대 가자식 말에 당연히 셀링이 시야데 장된 지렌도레 메두세야데 니 레가치야데 장된 지렌도레 메두 니 삼론 거야데 장된 따다 지렌도 메두세 어땡에 개바체고 다주 치고세야데 다테레 대제가 메나 따티 강네 소소 컨트도 그때 다치 여당토에 답시 된 거야 돼.
I think what I'm addressing here is the way that we think about the way we think in our daily life, the way we relate to various situations. And when we engage in something and we are 100% honest, we're 100% clear, we have no ulterior motive, there's a sense of strong honesty, and this is something that we want to try and cultivate. You're also probably familiar with this notion of sometimes, we put on a front, we try and hide different faults, we pretend, and the difference between being in the outside world and being alone in your bedroom, you can see a kind of difference in behavior. So here, what I'm talking about is really trying to check for yourself and to check the honesty, basically. How honest are you in your behavior? How honest are you in your thought patterns? And a way to do this is to look at yourself, and you can also look at yourself almost as if you were another person. So you can kind of reflect on your behavior, your physical behavior, but also your mental behavior, and to see if there is a genuine sort of harmony and an honesty, in a sense, between your actions and your thoughts, or are you in checking if that's the case. It's important to do this process of analysis, and once one is aware whether we are being a bit dishonest, we're not being actually truly sincere in what we're doing, then there's actually room for us to start to question it and to maybe change it if we think it's necessary.
Yeah. Taina ngazu mangboji yang samsamle ngazu tantati nyomo grexyando taina danzen senatra sama tesutete kope tamkebo shiwiji leyo shi ngazu koronte leyo ikon hama koyachi ane tindi mambo yongodo tate cheonde ane kozope tangazo komshinto masone pe shiwonjo tsavijilina kozo namsa tonchocho ane kozo nobache chocho nobache tsavijil shini ngazu ngazeyando tema to tambo kono chonga kono ngoma zen tindi mambo yugodo o tindi da chi counter susolea ane tachi che kavlena chi pe na ngazu chi lamsa ane kondo za chocho ane yana lamsa chi pasu to chocho lamsa kale chi kas mi chi labshana lamsa chi ane karzora ta sumbo ndo chandu ya to tsama ya bu tenjo na 아니 다 소소도 배 자침부 쉬워지 삼는데 다 지금 매직 남사 직대 축대서 랍잖아 소소 자침부 들이야 대 마용어요 대 가비야 대 손접제 제트로 참아 되는 데가 차대요 단도드나 내가 간르즈네 참아데 펜타르티 손에 라니 자침부 zange 단쟁게 마코 답시 갔던 거데 라니테 가르다 손접제 sekanda matra siso goya tindi jigna le ya so ani pa chukdo da so tindi jigna chundu yan shi moda tindi ro shinge ta mambo chasa konda ba tindi shi.
And so whether we think about disturbing emotions or if we're reflecting upon grasping at the self, this grasping and these disturbing emotions, they arrive in our mind. They're very skillful, they're very skillful, and they often arise in our mind and we're completely unaware of what's going on. They're very sly and they're very quick to come, and before we know it, we're completely taken over by these various disturbing emotions. And these disturbing emotions are really, they're ready to arise at any point. It's almost like an egg which is hatched. It's really on the, they're on the verge. They're really ready to be set off, in a sense. And we're often in this state of unawareness that they have actually come about in our mind, and that they're about, that the wave is about to crash, in that sense. And so, we notice this in our behavior, that we don't need much to get angry. We're often, ready, we get easily upset, we get easily annoyed. And this is really showing that all of this this readiness for disturbing emotions is all coming back to this root of grasping at the I, of this I being so precious, because we're doing this, in a sense, and this is the underlying current. If we hear one insult, immediately that sets us off. And why does that set us off? Because we're grasping at this I, which is so important. We're desperately trying to protect it. We want to leave this I completely unharmed. And all of our actions, actually, because of this underlying current of grasping at the self, are all sort of orientated towards protecting this I, towards leaving it unharmed. And so this is, guiding our behavior in a constant manner.
So, ane tindi ta so daten samba danzen te yoba ti wangi ta ane namji ngaso ge samlo de ta chik chore ge samlo lewa rani ge choto ta tambo rani re teni rani dan yo teni ta chik ane pa ni chundu do teni o dindi ge choto le ya ane chapa gawa tindi chok chik chi 다 대만 이전기 초라 생각니다. 이전기 초다지 소소가 잔도 있는데 임바리 대 마이나야 다지 아니 미샹바라 땅데 엔텔리 지가 다당이나 지가 남사니 당와도 되니지야 수 참마데 당보니 에 초리니스 체샤야 돼요. 다게 아니 당진세 돼요바 가랑게 디진생 마 참말 제대야시 다 따รับ근로 땅 되니 가는데 심마 아니 있는 거요래.
And within the different tenant systems, what they assert is that because of the power of grasping at the self and believing in this self-existent I, this creates a biased kind of attitude, in relation to all others. Yeah. So it means that I is number one, and then the friends and the close ones and kind of number two, and then everybody else kind of follows. So we create this classification in the mind of those which are close to us and are kind of part of this compartment of attachment, and then we have those that we don't like, which are part of like aversion, all of our enemies and so forth. And so this biased perception is really coming from this initial, again, grasping at the self. Yeah. And this is something which is asserted throughout all of the different tenet systems.
Lola so tatini tatiri daki gong shiga na shinga tindi ta mari base ti inte she shu ka le ta nambi ta zu chi ta mari ba mambo shi yobi nani ta chu do na ani ta khasang gang le chu chu sai ti ani li jin je la mong ba se tindi nam sha ta chi ge gedang ji bi ni ro tang ge na ta ti nam sha ma shi chi yong ko re se chi ni ba de ta ko chu kan le ji na ko nang ge ngwe ni tse ni Niling one the carriage, Conetang one it peke, the chick pat tin zabondana, comuni carriage as Yashingora, what Tindilea Mashiba Chani, Tin Momba Nisi, Tanti Shik Yagres, Tindi Momba Niti, any Chili and Masota, Nambita down Tindigani Desha Jamna, and was Lisa Grace, Lisa in the Shajamde, that Deleon Chingazu Andro, that Dendro Paycheck, Lee Mara New Gore, or Tambo to Yoba Wanga, and my son and Dola Sobatia. Niba de be jinsen ga ta dendro la so ba che tindi lisa gre se le ka tindi ta ko ni ma chawan do chin go re se.
And so, although there are these slightly different interpretations of what ignorance is, of what not knowing is, just in the previous class, I mentioned it to kind of sum it up again. There's these two sort of types, we could say, mainly of ignorance. The first one being not knowing, this ignorance in the relation to cause and effect, so not understanding or being unaware of cause and effect. This is the first type. And then the second type is not knowing, being unaware of reality, basically, really understanding what the situation is, what reality is. And this ignorance here, this not knowing here, is the second type of ignorance. And so as for the function, which is also asserted, so it is asserted kind of unanimously across all the different philosophical schools, is that because of these ignorances, these two types of ignorances, one is pushed, one is propelled to accumulate karma. And if we're talking about, negative karma, this will push oneself to take a lower rebirth in the hell realms and so forth. And if it's a positive karma, it will be a higher rebirth in the devas and so forth, and those higher realms of existence.
So that indeed that chick and it's hamate nyum that chick telema chungo yorese that and ma konkashi tansha yotate that's then si son yorese that chick Jongina Kaka Yorese, Tayang Chick, Jonglia, Lobjon Chetonget Indina, and a pandit Dawa Taba with an woman Jibanolia, then Numongi Jun Samati was in Jixola Tabas on the Tanda, Jisu Lelean, Jictas at the Mark Bandoyore, what Tilly Jixotali Chumores, or the Numo Jun Sama, and it Tatine, Chita Maribali Chungorese, the Chigre, then Ajenga Tandani, but the Chijitabean. Niba aneta tato de ani jixole tawa kebare te marik bare das te mariba ta tela ani tini chapa da damala so chungre se ti ma te kondya de shuto o den kimse ti chna se tini china niba nem ki gyode tumgre se tumita ki gang la tambo she tore sama tini ma tumgre le chungre se o da de chi konda yani desma
And so now I would like to quote a couple extracts from some traditional literature. So we have Entering the Middle Way here, which is which says is in relation to kind of paraphrase it, is how all sort of disturbing emotions arise basically from ignorance. Jiktsok gena jitsok di kare jikta. So all of the faulty sort of disturbing emotions, without exception, arise from this view of grasping at transitory collections. Yeah. So this is the first verse here. The second one is from the Pramanavartika, and so this is saying that all faults arise from this view of transitory collections. And because of this ignorance, we are attached to some things, and we feel aversion to others. And so the cause behind all of this, the cause of all of these different faults which are arising, due to this, the cause of this is ignorance. So both of these verses are referring to ignorance, which is really to be identified as the source of all of these sort of negativities in that sense.
So tatini ani zo ta jagarangi ni ta ngami ta chi nalenjang kiba tinri songsha tere tini de ta wodele ta pokin kiba tanda jirumbo chegya tan jiten kiba chenye bati sa marik sechi ta nga chun jiten kam go ta chi nyam ga zena ta kyongri chenye ba chong chama de ta ti sona sa marik bal tik de re sechi su dom de na mo tinri songsha yore te andina ma chi Transhayo, te Kandresina Pena, that the water and the shit on the chi, no chicken jictin, Tananga, so touching Nesa, touching Perojana to Nesan Zamboling, Zamboning like Quachaka, Mambo Chonsha, Samati, Techik, and then to Samaya, Tatina, Maripal, Tiguaya. Te non jetina la nation, Senjang Grigliana, touching Matsukanga Mambo Chongwa, Sama Maripali, Chungarezia with that doomed in the Capshires.
And so the two quotes that I've just mentioned now, they come from Indian scholars, and the following one here is from Tsongkhapa, a Tibetan scholar. And so in the Praise of Dependent Arising, he says, he states that so all of the sort of suffering that one endures in the world, all of the suffering which exists in the world, it has its root is ignorance. And so this is referring again to the same idea that ignorance can be traced back basically as root of all type of suffering that one experiences. So whether we're talking about the external sort of world, the world as well as its inhabitants, all of the suffering, all of the difficulties which are endured within, in the world and by its inhabitants, all of these are brought back to this unique root of ignorance.
That indeed, that Tamadi Tixa de Numon, Garzu, Sawan Numon de Sama, the Maribal Tikiores, Tindrishi Cablena, Ta Johnson and Madima, Annie, Ta Numon Jetan, Jutuk Rishi, Kazangalia, and Sums and she did Sudushana, Sumre, the Pa, Anita Jawachina, Annie Numon Jetan, and the Jutuk, Yonra, Tindikan, the Shijagre. That Jitic said that Tangasu, Penatang, Sondajilia, Penachi, Tanto China, Condrena, Majerina, counter the Bechic, Lamsa Yon Chocho, the carres only 10 chigures, 10 carriers in that young Mamboing Azula Comsha, Pacha Session. Or tea, you be Jim Sinket, Annie Lamsa, Annie, Numori the Lamsa Lion Corres, and she, or tea, Carsenat and the Tombo 10 said, Nikan in the Shichigre.
And so previously, I think it was in the last class, we talked about the three causes which bring about the arising of disturbing emotions. And this is important to understand because as we see, based upon these quotes, all disturbing emotions are arising out of ignorance. So it's important to be able to identify what the cause is for these disturbing emotions, the diverse sort of conditions needed for these disturbing emotions to arise. And so, although, the other class, I mentioned that there were 3. So this is a kind of the shortest or the most condensed sort of presentation you can give. Here today, we're going to explore the sort of 6 causes which bring about the arising of disturbing emotions. The first one has to do with the basis. And the basis is referring to the imprints which are left or which are dormant in one's mental continuum. So this is what we would call really the cause. Yeah.
ane ngole ya da kharso ta pachang ro sena temba de sinyar de na ane lamsa te jili yang lamsa te temba so cho cho de do ngole ya da ane so so ane chi pena tindi da chi ane ngam ta ro ina da jik ta ro tindi na chogre te mai be yang chi kharso ta chi semba kyo ro tindi na ya kantar ri kanen de si na ya tambo ane 지위 순저도 소소기라 하되어나 치스 아니 지견대서 되는 남사의 고용 조절시도 어빼된다고가 준유몽 그렇게 되게 순저도 단을 하되어 레전드시 어디니 가는 데 시죠 당보대.
And so this first one, this basis, another way to kind of understand it is if we think of, if something is kind of fresh in our mind, in the sense, if the imprint is there, then it's very easy for us to recall that piece of information, yeah? So it's almost like you can think of this basis and these imprints as sort of leftovers, in the sense, in the mind, in the mental continuum, which means that it enables a sort of easy arising in the future of that idea, and in this case, of disturbing emotions.
야, 다니바 데다 아니 다 텐디시 요나야 다 양 맞추여 무비 요르페나 다직 얘는 여러 네바시야 시요 얘는 여러 네바시야 때 뇨모 뇨모티어던 tumbi 일은 나와시야 다페나 직소소 아니 컨트롤사사시나 컨트롤사사가 비기 유르드 체온데 람사에 아니 컨트롤사야 직자도 고소 무비 젠도 무진세 심으로 진리기 전에 뇨모 람사께 버시 컨트롤사데서 미치요나 미대 만통나양 아니 고점바 젠도야시고도 딱 소소jel라티 아니 컨트롤사야 원래야 준르대요 다 봐서 예르드 태용데 남사 컨트롤사야 구강을 막아 차야시도 야나 차타오데 제는 카운터데 뭐 딘디 니바시 요레세 그치 텔야 무바세들.
And the second cause here is the object, yeah? So this is in relation to having close contact with a particular object, which causes the arising of a disturbing emotion. So we can think about it if we are angry with somebody, yeah? So that person who we're angry with would be the object of our anger. And it is when we enter into contact, when we see this person, that it kind of triggers us and anger arises within our mind. But we also notice that if we forget about that person, if we don't see that person, that anger will not really be present in our mind. It's really the moment where we see them or, we come into contact with them, that anger is ignited once again, or maybe we feel jealous or whatever. So this is the second sort of a cause, which is the object.
somebody somebody dang so yang chik da tini do se da tambo so so rangshin to pe na chik pe rangshi yakpo chik da chi karina da chi mi lo de ji na yang so so go ro pa de sen da khori ga wang ki khori din de wang de shi kin le ne so so le ya da chi zhong nian ba se guan na da counter chi shamba shi kin ge le ne yang so so da chi karina yang namji samlo ni chik ranshin de la do ya yang ti ga ni chi milipa ni chi tik se bolam ke chang do ya yang mil ya ni chi lamsa ni ka ji thong chong do che sen do ti ni jing ge so so ju shu ji na do ti ni sha ya ti ka ji ni mi shamba le du chi ni mi shamba sa ni yang ni ti yu chen ni so so le yang ti gyun de le ya wo tin dun zhen ya de lin den zhen ge wen ba se ko le se dun zhen ya de wo tin di ji de shi jia wo de
Duzin tegen namien tang gaboje tsigzo nang lula kuronso namien ten chi shagure
dunze sena tindi la mare on dunze sena ta pena pe tindi ge mi shamba nyam de zang zang yo sa no shana namien de le dunze ge wen ba se on de tindi zang zang sena ta tan dunze se de chena ma bo ja yong ko ra tan de de na ba do tindi ge ani 남지 in 린든zen jewen sem namto jewen ba kogre se or sem de namto ba 린든zen wen se on de tindi ge ta chi tikcha to bo kyun tindi yo sa le mandya mo tindi ka chi shi or
Less so. So this third one, which I'm trying to find a good word in English for it. It's a little bit difficult. We can think about it. I'll kind of describe the meaning, and then maybe we can find a good word for it. But the idea is the third cause being sort of environmental sort of influences upon oneself. Yeah. So depending on even if you're kind of a good person, you're quite chilled out, you're kind of kind in that sense, a relaxed person, when you enter into contact or you go along with people which are bad influence, we can also kind of called bad friends or whatnot, this will sort of affect your behavior, and which will then bring about the arising of disturbing emotions in your mind, because you would have spent time with such people which have this habit of disregarding, of looking down upon people. That type of that type of attitude will then affect you. You'll become polluted by these negative outlooks, which will then bring about for disturbing emotions to be generated in your mind. So it's kind of a sort of it's not quite a distraction, but it's kind of like being around a bustle, or kind of a hustle and bustle, which is bringing about sort of disturbing emotions in your mind. It can also be translated as frivolous entertainment, social diversions, which bring about these sort of disturbing emotions in your mind.
yeah ane thati ma shibade de sheke kablina so kande re song de namje ta chi tindi yorta ane namje chi ta lapcha yakbo da tindi jap den ke le ya chu so so ga ta chi lamton yakbo che den ke ne na ane tindi ge ne na ko so lamton chima che so so langan chi ma so na ta chi samlo ge chani re ane so so ge chi denlam zen da kandar tsama yakbo chi to to yoro ta ina ya de dokchong ro shin ge tindi pe ka shi ka de won ro ta tani chi lokshen ro tindi mambo che ta de zo le yang so so ge yang ta denba ro thong ne pa ri yang a mi se de so so Lansik zayat tempo de chik mayon de ko ka chitin de chine do tinde wang ge yang so so chik ngama ge ni ta chokoro lo do ya tinde wang ge ta chik yang ane mi samlo khore chin do ya jing do mi chamba ge chik tamshen tinde ge ta tinde le ning ni ni ta yang chik pen to ya tinde na de ko ya pen ma to ya tinde le ya mangbo nye be ka le pari ti shik chen de yang so so le ni tinde ga ne yang nyomo be ge re ze chik de she.
And number 4 is in relation to literally the word is explanation. Yeah. And so what this means is, if you spend time with a teacher, for example, and they explain various ideas to you, and you notice that they're useful, and then you're able to follow their advice, and then you will reap the benefits of it. So here you can think about these explanations, but not in the positive sense, they're in the negative sense. So it would be if one spent time listening to maybe a charlatan, and actually they were giving you advice which was unproductive, which was unhelpful, and although you maybe had previous beliefs in the past, all of these, you kind of let go of them, and you kind of decide to follow this sort of harmful advice. So there's this idea of this explanation being the 4th cause is in relation to being influenceable, easily changing your mind and kind of letting go of past beliefs and sort of taking on unhelpful sort of an unproductive sort of advice. And so if you're listening to advice which is from a different person, but it's helpful, that's not what we're talking about here. It's really about unhelpful, unproductive, sort of in a sense negative advice, which is creating conditions and which will actually be a cause for the arising of disturbing emotions in your mind.
So ane ta ngabade ta de ge gong li sho na shere to da chi thama nyoma tsama ya tu sa de che chi zawa de so so le ya da dang zhen se de le tri wa kang shin tin de yi wang ge ta so so le nyomo ane chi pena da chi kong de shin na kong chi za kong de thema chi za na shi da zing a so le nen jun du chi chi mo ma de ta de yang kong sa de yang jin se mo bo chang ni jin se ta pena so so chi ma ga se chong ko ma ga wa de ane ko ge ta so so le ya chi 다 가르서로 다지 가자지나 가자 가스 직전에 가자 딕장도 가자 배에 소소래야 나오면도 근데 가자 시에서 그래 양나 코 다지 강다 잡종 거 근데 전선 뭐뭐 사울로 당데 콘도도 식체체 곰 콘도 곰바 식치 무시운도야 근데 곰디 시우지 당세 지리나 다 람사 베게파 직 뇨모데 곰바 식치 왕게 뇨모 식친 베그레세 다 돈다 덴데시데 자고 곰바 같이 뇽아요나 테마틱스 마도 곰지메나 아니 티 소설이야나 지 노반도데 베친주 다 곰바 같이 식체르체르 당선에 곰메르지 마선에 메야 식치모 빠라데 직반에 차네 대용은 그 뇽모 톱체리도 그래세 덴디직 송고요다데
And so now the fifth one, which is habit, the fifth cause being habit. So like, which is, there's this kind of you'll see similar ideas with the ones that we've just mentioned, but again, bearing in mind that ignorance is the root of all disturbing emotions. We can think of, for example, the instance of anger. And if we get angry once, there is very sort of little power in the sense of that anger. But if it's something that we keep repeating, yeah, sometimes we get angry and then we think about it and we start to ruminate over all the different reasons why that person is an unlikable person. We start thinking of all the different, the different faults that they have. We think of the different insults and the unpleasant things that they've done to us. And we keep reinforcing it through this kind of, and we're creating this habit in our mind, this habit of anger. And we're trying to back our anger up with all these different reasons, and we just keep reinforcing it. And we're cultivating this habit while we're doing this. And the more we do this cultivation of this habit of disturbing emotions, or in this case, anger, the stronger these habits will be. And so we can notice as well, when we have a very weak habit and we have a very weak tendency, a weak habit in something, then the effect of that action or the depth of that action will be very weak, and they will bring about very little harm. But if there is a power in the habit, it's similar to, this a powerful fire. You're kind of fueling this fire, which is becoming stronger and stronger in that sense.
Yeah. Tane ta tamade tukbade ta namjing also yang chik zo chi garsen nga so ti gang le ro ta ne ko chik ta ching we ni se da man tan ba ji ti gang le so so ron do mang bo che ti ta ya ni nyomo ri mang bo ji phe wa ji to ko ba sho de ko we ni se chi karin na te ta ran te korang ge che jin de xiong ro wa che jin de ta ta na de go re ta ti gang le ya yang na pe de ka pe chik so perché ne ci chapane ci na pe ti gang le ya dondo mambo ci ne ya ci ya ga yu cho le ya mambo ji jinse mambo jang ne ti gang ne par chele ke ba ane so maga se ne maga de tindi ge counter da dro ta ne se dro ta ne nyomo phegre se ti sunme sushi mai ba yela che pa se unde ane te chudam man te me nam to mambo ji ke ya dro ta ne te nyomo chi gre se.
And so the sixth one is this sort of these conceptual thoughts which are not sort of in accord with reality. So it's going to be referring to all of this conceptuality, all these ideas, all of this kind of inner monologue, this inner sort of mental chatter, which is creating a projection on the external situation. And this inner monologue and projection is going to promote the arising of disturbing emotions. So it's one thing kind of looking at a situation and being able to perceive it exactly as for what it is, but here these projections are really bringing you completely off beam as to what the situation really is. And this can be a projection based upon the power of attachment. So for example, something that you really love, and you kind of think of all these reasons of how wonderful whatever this object is, and you exaggerate these qualities. And so this is bringing about the arising of disturbing emotions in your mind. Or it can be the opposite of a disliking and all of that projection that comes along with it. But the point here is really this mental projection, this inner sort of story that we build up and we project onto a situation, which will promote the arising of disturbing emotions in one's mind.
나서 다데 강을 가서 다치 도마 마리 바디 디니마 뇨모르 제타 마보진 레셰시 마보지 잡을 다디 가서리 강가 참마디 인테기어바 딘디지 다슈레 디니 다 데존 다치 파 냠보르지 카르텐 고르스 타마데 다디 딘디 저저 딘디 노 춘춘무시나 딘디 강가 참마디리 중고요나 당가서 간데시 딱 고레스 데 간데시는 파카에 Senator Suso, Telia, Donlendo, Chikarchia, Yorese, Tatigan, Tamading, and Tiganma, and the Duduzians.
And so up until now, we've been looking at ignorance, what it is, its process, how it's arising, its causes, and now just to finish, I would really like to address like the antidote. How do we deal with it? If ignorance is the root of all of our difficulties, of all of our suffering, then how do we eliminate it? How do we deal with it? So this is now what we're going to explore.
Tā marīpa nī tsūpi tīni mā tā nyōmōngu tā ngā sōla nō chō chia māmbō shio tī ngā sō tsāma jā rō wī na tā tī jā tī, jā ngō nī tī tī chā tī jā ngō nī tī pāmbara chepa la tā kār gō rī zē tī rī jā ngō nī tī tī sō yī na tī sō yā pām nī rī tā yā wī tā kār gō rī zē yōng tī tā anī tī yī shī yī mīk chē gō rī zē tā shīrab zē tā pē chō tāng gō rī zē tā rī shī tī gāng lī nāmbi tā rī gāng tī rī shīrab jīn tsōn chā nyōmō jā na anī mē bā sō gō rī zē Ante mato ani pena ani te chik namkyon ro te pecho matang ni pena ta chik ani muktsam ni ante de ante chichena ani porque ti de main kan nawe te cheto mare te la papa mare cheto mare zer o te ni chigreda.
And so the first antidote for ignorance, when we consider that disturbing emotions are our enemy, that they are our actual enemy, this is what we're trying to eliminate. The first thing we need to think about is how do we defeat this enemy? How do we attack this enemy? How do we tackle it? And so the first point here, which is recommended, is we need to have the eye of wisdom. Yeah, the eye of wisdom is actually our weapon in defeating the enemy. And usually it's something that we have completely sort of neglected and left aside, and something that we don't have. And it's almost like we're walking around with our eyes closed.
Pena tachi takpa chigli ya dun tunni. Ani peki du rendo sam. Teni soso lian chikcha che, ti kanga chung. Ta tindi kanga te, ti chikcha te meba che ala karache korsi. Tamlo yakshan te, peki wane ta takpa ndo chi, peki kokon chi yon yo te drima yinba tongto ya teres ta. Yakshan te. Ta ko wane soso du resam zun te yora, du resam samlo chi yora. Tati dhur mayim ba de susu ngito na ane ko dhur sambe jikta tsangma rangshin ka tini ma ti kanga tsangma dogdo gres o pe tenra o ta kargo gres tini ta thamlo yashur de ta tini susu ga ta rangi tsa chimbun zin de jinzin se nara danzin se ko zuya de kanda jinzin sa se ti rangshin de yapo ta to go gres ta tonda de ta tina ti gang le ta chik atu chik And so
if we return back to this example I mentioned before with this snake and this rope, so the rope coiled up being confused as a snake. So we see this rope coiled up and we don't see it as a rope, we see it as a snake. And because we see it as a snake, then we cling at it as being a snake, we believe it as a snake, believe it as being a snake, then fear arises, and then we have all these problems and issues which come about. Yeah. So the problem, that what we need to shift here is our perception of the snake. We need to be able to change our belief and understand that actually there is no snake. Yeah, we need to change the way that we're seeing the situation into actually what it is. And so if we're able to shift our belief and see that there is no snake, then all of the fears will lose, they will disappear on their own. They will lose their power because there is no sense for that belief to be there in the first place. And so here, the method that this is exactly the same here in the sense that we're applying it to the eye. And whether we're talking about believing in a self-existent I or this self-cherishing attitude, we need to be able to look at the I for what it is. We need to be able to see it for actually what it is. And this is really, really, really the point here of these teachings here, is to change basically this belief and this perception of the I.
Yeah, tantagi petinrawo. Penadachik takpanrawo de sebo sila masila vaji mantona, tanga so cargo grezonde. Inzu watchig pecho tantona, watchig. Oh, bagi sebo se janshi tontoyana, the ko taba de drumayamba, sebon tontogura, ten tontoyana, that till a paving chan jamra nasha. Tanga zuga di word of whatsapp the cargo resin, namjing a suga tachik, netan sama de marzo gomatia. Netan Karaimba, and a Chuma Chivin the Tamatuni, Di Yoda Sama Chunguyana, that did Sama Tatue, what do Chicago is on the, and it under Shirab Zeti, and a Shirab down Tatuna, and a Tende Tobi Shirab Zet. Tende Zeg, Di Shirab di so Petutantona, that nearly Sama de Chuma Chintong, Tinning also Kanga Mambo Shiranshing Dodo Greze, that the dome do was it in the Gona Power.
And so just like we're not able to see the snake for a rope because of the quality of the light. Remember, it's dawn or it's dusk and it's very unclear. The way for us to be able to see the snake requires us, shedding light on the situation, putting light in the room. So then we're able to see the situation. We're able to see that there is no snake. And so the fear disappears. Yeah. So it's this clarity. It's the clarity and the power of the light, which is going to dispel the anguish which is initially there. And so here we can think of the light, or in the sense, sorry, the darkness here of we're not knowing the situation, we're unaware of the situation, we're unaware of pretty much all situations. And this unawareness and this lack of knowing is bringing about all of the different problems that we're enduring in our day-to-day life. So we need to be able to develop this light of all knowing, all situation, which is really referring to the wisdom of being able to see situations for what they are, as they are, in a sense. And this, how is it done? This light, what actually is it referring to? It's referring to the wisdom of dependent arising. And dependent arising, with this light of dependent arising, we're able to see situations for what they actually are, and therefore this eliminates all of the problems and all of the suffering that we experience. And this is really the basis, the fundamental idea to understand here.
다 시럽지 고래 워크 참로데 시럽지 배교 당고 그래서 돼. 다 시럽된 원전 제비 qabla 양네 답에 아니 다직 아니 다 남지 다 남아서 마보게 된디 강래야 다 고도서는 다 된디 마보지 네 생요래 다직 동니 도배 시럽지야지 기치고 임바데 다 동반이 도배 시럽지야다 돌드나 텐제지야지 티카치 시그레 티 애니 랑신된 아니 탐제데 템비 랑신 상마다직 안에 반세 뚜르고 남샤지 그 강에 사블 당토나 란싱은 가초가 다지 아니 강에 먹어지 동토야 다대 임바데 단다디 지금 강에 안에 단다 시로 님보레 대나싱가 단다 시로 님보레 ndo 상제랑 그송 데니마 고볼로 그 자시 데니 타말라야 데니마 안에 바발라레 데니 mam보지 다 상마 송야 돼 애니다 안 텐데 도베 시럽시 동반이 도베 시럽시 딘디 강라 마 틱샤 요레시 다 틱산리티.
Mm-hmm. And so this wisdom, which is, the metaphor here of the wisdom here is the light. The light is referring to wisdom, and so it's something which I'm sure you're familiar with and that you've studied in the past. You've heard the importance of, the wisdom which is realizing emptiness, and the wisdom which is realizing emptiness is referring to the wisdom of dependent arising. It means developing this understanding of the dependent nature of different phenomena. It means understanding the interconnection, how they function, in amongst themselves and interrelation, and the inter sort of functioning that each phenomena has with one another. And by developing this perception, one is naturally able to eliminate all of the problems that one experiences in this world. And here on this slide, I've got different quotes. And the first one is a quote from the Heart Sutra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form, emptiness is no other than form is also no other than emptiness. Then I've put down a quote here of Nagarjuna, which is in relation to dependent arising as well. And so the second one is from the verses on fundamental wisdom by Nagarjuna. So it's anything which is dependent arising. Can't you think it's correct? So there is no phenomena which is not a dependent arising, and therefore there is no phenomena which is not empty. Yeah. And then there's also here a verse of Aryadeva from the 400 verses. And this verse says, just like the so the touch consciousness, just like it fills the entire body, yeah. Our ignorance is pervading all, yeah. And because our ignorance pervades all, 그냥 uma 시기하게 되잖아.
나다게 강래 주서 단다 맞죠 리 아니 리죠 세대 리 다치 참마라 내와나 신세 시래 참마 내나 신이 아니 다치 뇨모 참마야 아니 뇨모 가르스 뇨모 간레지나 띠가 내들이야 타트는 뜸을 내대요래서 뜸을 뜸을 맞잡서 시고 말해서 주시래 이 전나 안에 다치 뇨모 탐체장 뜸을 아니 좀 더나 뇨모 좀 그래서 양식
Lesson. Okay. And so this verse of Arya Deva is in relation to this idea of the sense, the touch of the sense of touch in the body, which pervades the entire body, and similarly, ignorance pervades all disturbing emotions. Therefore, if ignorance is eliminated, all of these disturbing emotions are eliminated. So it's talking about the pervasion in this sense.
So that
So I think today time is up, and I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and
see you on Monday. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.